Perfect. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to give it one more minute. But just so you know, we will be recording today's session about global mobility and how to hire foreign talent in Canada. And we'll be sharing that recording once it's ready after today's session. So you get access to all the information we'll be talking about today, as well as the slides to the presentation. So I am just going to enable the waiting room here. Perfect. So just one more minute and we'll get started. And thank you for joining us today. Please, we ask you to keep yourselves on mute. And when the Q&A, the time for questions comes, I'll be happy to answer these either through the chat box or feel free to unmute yourselves. And we'll have a discussion about those questions, okay? Perfect. So I'll just go ahead and get started. And as people join the waiting room, they'll be able to get access into the presentation. So everyone can see my screen. Perfect. Here we go. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us today in this Global Mobility webinar. We're going to be covering a series of topics that are very interesting for Canadian employers who wish to hire foreign talent to Canada. We're going to cover everything from the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which involves the LMIA, the Labor Market Impact Assessment process, or the sponsorship process, to International Mobility Program with exemptions of such and types of work permits to Canada. So we'll start with a very brief introduction of who we are and how we can help you as a company. My name is Maria Garces Cubels. I'm an RCIC, Regulated Canadian Immigration Consultant, and I've been with Encubate for almost 4 years now. I initially started with our consultations department, and as I gained interest, experience, and education in the immigration field, moved to our legal department, specialized in economic-based immigration, work permits, and of course, global mobility, which is our today topic of discussion. I also speak Spanish. If you have anyone in your team who requires service in any other languages, and we'll see what other services Encubate can offer as well. And this is our principal consultant, Mr. Basil Sauter, and the one who established Encubate almost 10 years ago. He's been in the industry for both US and Canada immigration for a long time now, and is also a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. This is a brief overview of our team. We're all spread through our different offices, including our Chief Wolf Officer, Rexy. We'll talk in a minute about our offices, but the reason we like to show off this slide is to demonstrate that we all came, or the majority of us came to Canada through different immigration pathways, through different permits, study permits, work permits, and are now have achieved or are on our way of achieving permanent residence, which comes to say that there is a way for everyone to seek that immigration pathway, or at least that temporary residence to Canada. We have 4 offices in Canada at the moment, although we also have team members working outside of Canada in branches like Brazil and previously Lebanon. So our Toronto office is our biggest office. We have one in Vancouver, where I am located today, our most recently open office in Calgary, and our office in Montreal as well. But we obviously service and offer all our services to clients and companies in Canada and around the world. We count with 3 licenses in our team. And we are also licensed and authorized to represent clients and assist you with Quebec immigration-related matters for the majority of applications that not only at a permanent residency base, but also temporary residence for certain selection of workers. The government of Quebec requires a special authorization, and we do have, we count with the license and the expertise to assist you with that as well. And of course, any other provinces and territories across Canada. Now, that's it for the introduction. I will not make you wait any longer. And let's switch to the actual topic of today's webinar, which as an employer may interest you when considering hiring foreign talent in Canada. We know that it can be confusing. It can be quite a hectic process if this is your first time doing it. And sometimes all the information that we find online cannot be as helpful as we hope. So we're gonna hopefully dissect all these topics today. And the goal of today's session is give you a better understanding of what are those authorizations for foreign workers to Canada and what are the options that you have as an employer, as well as your requirements to hire foreign talent. We'll start with a very, very brief overview of type of work permits that employees can get in Canada, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding throughout the next slides of each of these permits. I've highlighted a few based on the main topics of discussions for today's session. And there we go. But generally speaking, we divide this into groups based on the requirements that we need to apply for each of these work permits. In the next few slides, I'll be explaining the types of work permits that are available to foreign workers in Canada. But a few examples I will be touching today are the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which involves the approval of ESDC, of Employment and Social Development Canada. We'll also be discussing in brief international free trade agreements that could facilitate the hiring of foreign nationals from certain nationalities due to this agreement that Canada has with foreign countries. We'll also be discussing within the Canadian interest group, one of my favorite exemption codes, which is the Francophone Mobility C16 for those who are proficient in French. And we'll also be touching on intracompany transfers in case your company organization here in Canada has foreign branches or subsidiaries in other countries and wishes to transfer employees from those foreign entities to Canada. So before we jump into this, let's look into what are the types of work permits to Canada. Generally speaking, we see a two-way division. We have open work permits and we have closed work permits. Open work permits are open in nature, as in a foreign national can be issued an open work permit without any restrictions on the hours of work that they can work per week, without any restrictions on the position or the location, other than the validity of the permit. This type of open work permits, as an employer, you can hire these foreign nationals up until that validity or demonstration that they have either extended or applied for a new permit, and then they could continue working afterwards. So there's no much science behind these types of permits. What we are going to focus today on are on closed work permits. We find different types of closed work permits, but these are important for you to understand as employers, because in the majority of cases, they will have your name, the employer's name listed in that work permit. Closed work permits can be closed because they are restricted to a specific position. They can be closed because they're restricted to a specific employer, or they can be closed because they're restricted to a specific school or program, for example, co-op work permits. We're going to focus on the second, which is restricted to employers. And within this restriction of closed work permits, there are many ways that foreign nationals can achieve this type of closed work permit. We divide this into another two big subcategories, which are the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which does require approval from ESDC. It's a two-step process where not only the immigration branch of the government is involved, but also the employment and social development part of the government, which is ESDC. So in this process, we'll explain it in depth in the next few slides, but just keep in mind that it's a two-step process where we first require approval from the labor branch, and later on we can apply, or the employee can apply directly for that work permit. But then we also have the International Mobility Program, which involves a series of LMIA exemption codes, meaning that the employer is exempted from that requirement of the approval from ESDC, the option above. And there's based on certain categories. Now, these categories could be, as we saw in the previous slides, could be as a result of certain nationalities, based on free trade agreements. It could be based on certain qualifications that a person could have, such as a French mobility program, or it could be based on also nationalities that could fall under the International Experience Canada, for example. We're going to give you a better overview of this, and we'll be explaining more in depth the intracompany transfers, the LMIA exemption code C16 for Francophone mobility, and the free trade agreements. Before we dive into this, it's important to understand, in case you're not familiarized with this just yet, the NOC classification structure that Canada uses. And there's the new version as of November of 2022. It is a tier division, and we find 6 different levels from 0 to 5. And it's a way for the government to categorize each job position based on, generally speaking, the training, the education that's required to perform that job, the experience, and any other requirements that one individual might need to perform that job. And then we categorize it per group. So generally speaking, tier 0s are management occupations. Tier 1 tend to require university or at least the completion of a 3-year program as an educational requirement. And then we have tier 2 and 3, which are more technical positions. 2 will require at least a 2-year diploma completion, and 3, some sort of post-secondary diploma or on-the-job training. 4 and 5 tend to be what we consider unskilled or semi-skilled positions from an immigration perspective, and they may not require as high of an education or experience to perform the job. And here are some of the examples that we can find here. It's important to be familiarized with the NOC structure as an employer, and this is something that we can obviously help you with, identifying the right NOC based on the duties, based on the requirements. But you will see, as you start to see more of these exemptions, more of this process, that the NOC codes are everywhere within employer sponsorship and hiring foreign nationals. It's a way for the government to identify each position and determine what category they fall under. So again, familiarize yourself with the NOC structure and understand mainly the duties section, because that's the duties, or what we call the daily activities. That's what officers will use to determine if the offered position is indeed or falls indeed within that NOC. Perfect. So let's jump into the LMIA process under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which again will require us to get acceptance, get an approval from ESDC. LMIA stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment, and it's a process by which an employer demonstrates to the government that they have tried to recruit someone in the Canadian labor market, but they have not found anyone who fits for that position or has the requirements or has experience to fulfill that position. So hence the name. At the end of the process, an officer will determine if hiring a foreign national will indeed impact positively or negatively the labor market. If we were to get a positive LMIA, then the officer has determined that there's indeed a need for that employer in Canada to hire a foreign national. And if we end up obtaining a negative LMIA, then the officer would have reasons to have refused that LMIA because they either believe that more efforts could have been conducted to recruit Canadian nationals and permanent residents, or that there is indeed enough labor demand for that position in Canada. The process itself, we'll explain it in the next few slides, but let's start with the employer requirements, what you need as an employer to submit an application for an LMIA. There is no minimum company size or revenue. However, one of the documents to submit will be, or a few of the documents to submit will be certain CRA documents, such as your T2 schedules, T4 schedules, and what the government tries to see with this is whether you have the financial capacity to pay the wage that you are offering this temporary foreign worker. We've had cases, we've had clients where they were startups and they were still unable to demonstrate enough profit for them to pay that wage. And the way we tackle these cases, of course, we'll look at this case by case, but we suggest to get an attestation from accountants confirming that that wage can be paid, perhaps also a future revenue structure explaining how the company intends to grow and hence pay those wages. But again, the purpose of this explanation or these documents is to prove to the government that we can indeed pay that offer wage to the foreign worker. This goes in hand with the business legitimacy documents that we need to demonstrate. There's two main sets of documents, one of them being able to demonstrate that you are a company that is offering a good or a service in Canada. Again, here we can use an attestation, we can use the provincial registration documents, federal documents, but it's mainly proof that we are providing a good or a service. And then the second one, which is what I was just mentioning earlier, the ability to fulfill the job offer terms. So being able to pay that offered wage to the foreign worker. We have to comply with the employer requirements, meaning that we may get an inspection from ESDC and we have to comply with what they ask us for. This is rare, but it could happen. They could also ask for employee records for up to 6 years since we sponsor a foreign national, and we need to comply with the job offer requirements that were promised to the government. For example, if we, in an application for a labor market impact assessment, we mentioned that we will be paying this temporary foreign worker $40 an hour for a period of, let's say, 1 to 2 years, we need to stick to that. Now, the time condition, it's a little tricky because we've seen cases where companies were not able to offer that job anymore to the foreign worker, or the position just didn't work. There are cases where if we provide enough documentation, if we provide enough explanation, there should not be an issue from the employer side. But when it comes to wage, we need to be we need to stick to the wage that was initially offered, and also remember to adapt that wage as it increases at a provincial level. There's also a need for transition plan for certain streams. So part of the LMIA questions will involve, the application questions will involve you as an employer explaining how you intend to support that employee for a permanent residency application in the future, if that's your goal, or alternatively, how do you intend as an employer to transfer the skills from this foreign national to your Canadian citizens, permanent residents, employees, or future employees. And lastly, there may be a requirement for you to have employer registration certificate. As of now, only the provinces of British Columbia and Manitoba require it, but there may be new provinces and territories in the future. The process itself, it's straightforward. It starts by determining the position, the wage, and the rest of conditions that need to be met for that specific job offer. If there's any licensing required for that specific position, we need to ensure that the candidate that we have in mind meets with those requirements. And once that's determined, we go ahead and we post the job for 4 consecutive weeks through 3 different platforms. One of these advertising platforms needs to be JobBank, which works together with ESDC. It is free of charge, and you can extend it for up to 120 days. And you must, as an employer, invite to apply to all those candidates who are Canadian citizens and permanent residents and who meet all the requirements that we have set in that position. So we will need to review all those applications and invite for an interview to those who meet those requirements. If any of the candidates let's assume they meet all of the location and experience requirements, but they are not Canadian citizens or permanent residents, you do not have to contact them back. Again, the purpose of this exercise is to demonstrate to the government that you have tried to recruit in the Canadian labor market. Okay. Once the 4-week advertising period is over, we'll wrap up the application, prepare the form, and submit evidence that we've conducted the advertising period. Nowadays, this application is submitted through the LMIA online portal, so it's completely digital. There will not be a need of original documents unless requested by the officer, but this is rare. And processing time is, as of right now, 2 to 4 weeks. I've seen some 6-week cases, depending on the streams. An example of some of the streams, depending on the type of job offer we see, is the high and low wage stream, the global talent stream, which is very interesting, and I'll discuss a bit more later, the permanent residency support stream, and there's a few more. For the global talent stream, which is one of the examples that I just mentioned, it is interesting because it's a stream that focuses on certain positions that are currently in demand in the Canadian labor market. I've said some of the positions, and these are just a few examples. The list is actually quite long, but these are just some of the samples for you to get an idea of the type of positions that are currently eligible under this stream. Now, this is not an LMIA exemption, meaning that we are still required to submit an application and request approval from ESDC, but it's a facilitated process because as an employer, we are exempted from the recruitment efforts, meaning that we do not have to post the job position for 4 consecutive weeks. We can go ahead and submit the LMIA application based on the need for the position and the fact that it's been determined to be an in-demand occupation in Canada. We must meet the median wage for the position, which is something that's mandatory for all LMIA applications. And as I just mentioned, there's a list of these positions. Generally speaking, they're tech IT positions. And what's very cool about this stream is that they do indeed process these applications in a priority basis. I've seen applications processed in as little as 1 week, although ESDC promises 15 to 20 business days. So it's quite fast, but they also offer from an IRCC perspective. So once the ESDC part has been approved, we move on to the work permit IRCC part, and this part also gets prioritized because it's a global talent stream category. That's for the LMIA process, or what a lot of employers and candidates called sponsorship process, where again, we require permission or approval from ESDC. And then we're going to move into the other category, which exempts us from this requirement based on certain criteria. So just to put this in better words, generally speaking, if we need to hire or if we want to hire a foreign national in Canada, we need to request permission to ESDC through that LMIA process. But in the case where our applicant or as an employer fall under any of these LMIA exemptions, then we can disregard that LMIA process and go ahead and apply directly for a work permit. So this international mobility program that I'm going to be discussing in the next few slides has a very, very wide list of exemptions. We're only going to be covering a few, but if you're still interested about knowing all these exemptions and whether your potential candidates, employees, or you as a company could fall under any of these exemptions, I'll be sending together with the recording, I'll be sending that link to the list of these exemptions. Now, what's important here is that the job offer that we are issuing to that foreign national needs to be in a qualified tier 0, 1, 2, 3. So that table that we saw, only those 4 categories are eligible under the International Mobility Program. In this case, as I said, we're not requesting an approval from Employment and Social Development Canada. We're directly applying for a work permit, but we have to do a very first step, which is submit that job offer through IRCC's employer portal. IRCC stands for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So once the job offer has been submitted, it takes up to 2 business days to get approved. And that will result into what we call an A number. And once the A number has been issued, we can go ahead and apply for the work permit, linking it to that A number. So it's a way for the government to link that online offer of employment to the temporary foreign workers work permit. Examples of this, as I said, the list is long, but some of the examples and the codes that we get to see a lot get used are the intracompany transfers. Here, there's 3 main categories. We have specialized knowledge, managerial positions, and senior executive positions. So only within those 3 categories, employees working in foreign branches, subsidiaries, or even if we have an affiliate relationship with another company outside Canada, can be transferred to the Canadian branch, initially for up to 3 years, and this can be renewed as we go. What's important about this category is that the employee that we are looking to transfer must have been working for the company either on a contract basis or as an employee for at least 1 year prior to the application. They need to demonstrate that they've been established with the company. We need to do so through employment reference letter, pay stubs, contracts, and so on. And we need to demonstrate the need for this specific worker to come to Canada. Is this for a specific project that we are looking to develop in Canada? Is this because this person is coming to train our Canadian team and, again, part of a temporary project? But the whole idea behind it is that this worker will eventually go back to their home country. So we need to explain in detail 2 main things. One is the purpose for this employee to come to Canada. And number 2, how are we going to support the transition back to their home country once the project or once the temporary assignment is done? Whether that employee stays in Canada afterwards and renew their work permit, that's something different. But initially, when we apply, we need to have those two key explanations in mind. Another very interesting exemption code is a free trade agreements that I was discussing. Here we have find anything from CUSMA, which will involve Canada, Mexico, and US. There's a list of positions that are eligible under this free trade agreement. And we need to meet with the minimum qualification and requirements for each position. So that agreement already has established a list of positions that are eligible for that free trade transfer. And just to clarify, under free trade agreements, the employee does not have to be working for any foreign branch. We could be hiring anyone that's working in other companies, as long as they meet with the minimum experience and education requirements listed in that agreement. And lastly, another great example of LMIA exemption codes is the C16 code, which we'll touch in depth in the next few slides. But in brief, candidates who can demonstrate an upper intermediate level of French and have a job offer in a qualified occupation tier 1, 2, 3 outside of Quebec could apply under this exemption code without the need of having to go through an LMIA, that approval from ESDC, just based on the fact that they can speak French. This falls under the Francophone Mobility Program. Which brings me to the next slide. So just to dissect these requirements a little further, upper intermediate means a CLB 7 in the Canadian language benchmark grading score that the government uses. This translates into a B2 level. And the candidate needs to demonstrate this knowledge in French through one of the 2 accepted exams, the TEF Canada or the TCF Canada. As I said, the job offer must be in a tier occupation classified as 0, 1, 2, or 3. It has to be a job offer outside of Quebec, and we are exempted under from an LMIA, like I just mentioned. This is one of the many ways the government is trying to bring or to increase Francophone immigration and Francophone workers outside of Quebec. So hence the requirement for the job offer to be outside of Quebec. Important note here is that although French is required under this exemption, it is not a mandatory requirement for the employee to have French as their daily work use, but there needs to be some sort of explanation as to why this person's level of French is required for the position. It could be because you have certain clients that require to speak French. It could be for a specific project. It could be for many reasons, but there needs to be that explanation on that link as to why this person needs to speak French. Right, so I believe we're almost at the end of the presentation. I forgot to mention at the beginning, I did not want to take too much of your time. I want to leave as much time as possible for questions, discussion, comments. But just before we wrap up, also wanted to go through the work permit application process for you to understand how long the process takes, what are the logistics, and what is your involvement as an employer once we either determine we go through the temporary foreign worker program or the international mobility program. Work permit applications nowadays are submitted online. In the majority of cases, only a few certain occasions we can apply paper-based. And what's very cool about a current public policy is that generally speaking, work permit applications had to be submitted outside Canada. Because of COVID, they put a public policy in place that's been extending for 2 years now. And we are now looking for an additional 2 years of coverage of this public policy that allows individuals in Canada who are here on a visitor status to also apply for work permits. Of course, assuming that they meet with the requirements of the temporary foreign worker program or the international mobility program to apply from within Canada without having to leave the country. Processing time right now, it's looking more like 3 to 4 months, to be honest. It truly depends on the type of application, if it's a family application, principal applicant, and their spouses, but generally speaking, right now, I'm seeing 3 to 4 months of processing time. Once approved, if we're transitioning from a visitor status to worker status, only till the point that person obtains the work permit, they can start working for you. Okay, depending on the nationality, we can also process that work permit at certain POEs that we call, or port of entry submissions. Certain nationalities do have the advantage of going to the nearest border and submitting the work permit application on the spot, meaning that it gets processed within a matter of hours, even minutes in some cases, and we get issued the work permit right there. With that work permit, once we have it on hand, we can start working, or the employee can start working for the employer. And other certain nationals can submit work permit upon arrival to Canada. So this, for example, includes the CUSMA. This is a section covered under the Free Trade Agreement. So for US nationals and Mexico, they can prepare, if they, assuming that they are located outside Canada and we are bringing them to Canada for a specific job position, we would prepare the application as a package, and upon arrival, they can submit the application at the airport as well. All right, so just before we jump into questions, I think I've been very good with the time and stick to the 30 minutes that I was looking for. Just wrapping up what we just discussed, 2 main avenues to hire foreign workers or hire foreign talent in Canada. We have the temporary foreign worker program, which requires approval from ESDC, LMIA process. It's a 2-step process, first with ESDC and then with IRCC. And number 2, the international mobility program, which depending on what our qualifications as an employer, for example, the intracompany transfer, or as an employee based on their nationality or abilities, we could be exempted from needing that approval from ESDC and apply directly for a work permit. But in this case, we need to submit first a job offer through IRCC's employer portal. Okay. I think that was the main summary I wanted to give here. So I hope that helped clarify a lot your questions on how to hire foreign talent. And I am open now for discussion, questions, comments. Don't be shy. If you want to unmute yourselves and ask them, please do so. If not, feel free to use the chat box as well. I'm gonna open the chat box here. Perfect. Hi, Janet. Thank you for your question. What we're asking here is, can you comment on which type of work permit applications require prevailing median wage to be paid? So, great question. For the temporary foreign worker program, they will all require that median wage to be paid. So that's mandatory for all LMIA streams. There are certain comments on the global talent stream, but it will be mentioned per occupation. There's a minimum of at least 80,000 Canadian dollars annual salary that needs to be offered for certain occupations, or median wage if that is hired. So for the temporary foreign worker program, LMIA applications, we need to meet with a median wage in order to be eligible. Now, under the International Mobility Program, I wish I could tell you the complete list of codes that do not require to meet the median wage, but generally speaking, the majority of free trade agreements do require to meet the median wage. Some that fall under, for example, the International Experience Canada, those do not require to meet the median wage. Intracompany transfers do require to meet the median wage. If you have any specific in mind that you want to ask, I can check for you, but generally speaking, international mobility is very, I would say 70-30, 70 as in we need to meet with offering the median wage, and 30 not. And I'll be happy to check this further and send it your way after today's session. Thank you for the question. My pleasure. More questions, please. And I'll give you a few minutes in case you need to type longer questions. And as I said, we'll be sharing the recording as well as the slides once they're ready. Yes, I hope I just answered your question there. We will be sharing the PowerPoint probably tomorrow, because the recording takes a little to get ready, but we'll be sharing that with you so you have access, as well as the links to each of the sections that I mentioned. Another question, thank you very much. Can you comment on employment type for ICT? Would a contractor that has worked for the company for a year potentially qualify, or do they need to be a full-time employee? Excellent question. They do not. And the key word here is the type of relationship that we can demonstrate between the employee, the qualifying employee, and the qualifying business. So the instructions and the program itself covers also candidates that have been working as contractors, but we need to demonstrate that what's the service that has been offered by that person in the foreign country. It could be through, of course, a service reference letter. It could be through contracts, pay stubs, and any other type of communication that that person has had with the employer. The 1 year needs to still remain. So the 1 year employment, it's valid, but it does not need to be as a full-time employee. However, we need to consider at least 30 hours per work a week, more or less, that this contractor has served the company. If there's, for example, cases where we have 15 hours 1 week, 40 another, we could argue that the nature of that job did require that schedule for that person to have those hours per week. But generally speaking, at least 30 hours per week as a contractor is sufficient. And again, another thing to keep in mind here is, how are we going to transfer this person to the Canadian branch? Again, it could still be on a contractual basis. but we still need to demonstrate that relationship to the company, the knowledge that that person has to the company, and it still needs to fall under one of those three categories, either specialized knowledge, senior executive, or managerial occupations. Okay. Perfect. No problem. And we'll wait until 45 to let you guys ask more questions. And please do feel free to ask questions after today's webinar. If you have any needs, if you believe that we could assist you with any of these services, we'll be happy to jump on a call and provide you more details with how we assist companies and employers in Canada. I know that one of the most hectic process is for employers to determine the eligibility for each of these candidates under these categories. And this is something that we can certainly help you with in order to get you right on track with starting the process, either through the sponsorship, LMIA, or the International Mobility Program. So we'll be happy to discuss this further after the session today. Perfect. So if there are no more questions, we'll start to wrap up. I'll leave some details here, I believe, yes. And we very much have to update this picture here, but let's just look at the information. Feel free to reach out to me through WhatsApp if you prefer that method of communication. I'll be happy to get back to you. Our websites, we have a dedicated website for global mobility where you'll be able to understand better our services and how we can help you as employers to fill in certain gaps that you may have with hiring foreign talent. And then this is my email, maria@incubate.ca, also my LinkedIn. Again, I'll be happy to connect. Make sure I'll reach to every one of you after the session today. And provide you with the slides, the recording, and again, with further discussion to how we can assist you. So thank you very much. I'm just gonna respond to a couple of messages here. Awesome. So thank you again for joining. I hope it was insightful. Thank you so much. I wish you a great rest of your day. Good weekend starting tomorrow. And we'll definitely be in touch to discuss things further. Let me stop sharing. There we go. Perfect. Thank you all for joining today. Again, I hope it was insightful, and we'll stay in touch for next steps. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.